Atami stared in disbelief at the scene before him. He couldn't believe that he had actually struck gold. Not just a small amount either, the sheer quantity was beyond his wildest imagination. However, bringing such a massive fortune home posed a daunting challenge. He needed to cross a Nazi-occupied territory to make it back safely. In 1944, Finland was ravaged by war, with extreme shortages of resources and a hostile living environment. For an ordinary person, possessing gold meant access to more opportunities for survival and resources. So Atami decided to take a gamble. Sure enough, he hadn't traveled far before encountering a Nazi unit, but Atami showed no fear and walked straight toward them. The soldiers, seeing a lone local man with nothing but a bag, burst into mocking laughter. Even the officer, seeing Atami's calm demeanor, didn't stop him. He even prevented his deputy from shooting. The unit soon moved on, oblivious to the secret Atami carried, and Atami managed to escape unscathed. With his dog by his side, he continued toward home, but before long, he encountered another group of soldiers. This time, luck wasn't on his side. Atami had no choice but to dismount from his horse. The officer quickly deduced from the tools on Atami's horse that he was a prospector. It wasn't long before the soldiers discovered the bag full of gold. Their joy at this discovery was palpable, but little did they know that Atami had already resolved to kill them all. He knew they wouldn't let him go. After sending his beloved dog away, Atami launched his assault without hesitation. The officer's gruesome death shocked the soldiers into a daze, giving Atami the opening he needed to counterattack. Who would have thought that such a heavily armed squad would fall so quickly to Atami? The entire fight was over in less than a minute. Though the battle ended swiftly, the repeated gunfire alerted the Bruno. Sensing trouble, he immediately turned back in his tank. The sight awaiting him was shocking. He couldn't believe that Atami had wiped out an entire squad so effortlessly. Then, the Bruno, a piece of gold on one of the fallen soldiers. It didn't take him long to piece things together. Atami must have much more gold on him. Determined, the Bruno the tank in pursuit of Atami's escape route. Soon enough, Atami realized he was being chased, but what he didn't expect was that the tank would open fire on him directly. Seeing the situation, Atami quickly fled to a safer distance, but Bruno clearly had no intention of letting him go and unleashed the tank's full firepower. Despite being at a disadvantage, Atami managed to escape unscathed. Bruno, however, didn't rush to pursue him. Instead, he stood atop the tank, watching Atami with an eerie calm, as if he were waiting for a good show to unfold. Atami knew he had stepped into a minefield, but with no other escape routes, he had no choice but to press forward. Tragedy soon struck. When Atami regained consciousness, he found himself unharmed, but his horse had taken the brunt of the landmine's deadly force. As he breathed a sigh of relief, he noticed his gold scattered across the ground. Hastily, he began collecting it. Meanwhile, Bruno and his soldiers arrived and stood right in front of Atami. Bruno was stunned by the dazzling sight of gold scattered everywhere, but Atami didn't pay the greedy gazes around him any mind. He quickly stuffed all the gold back into his bag. Then, he picked up a stone from the ground, and the two sides stood facing each other in tense silence. Bruno decided to make the first move. He ordered his men to raise their sniper rifles. At the critical moment, Atami hurled the stone in his hand. The ensuing explosion from a landmine sent a cloud of smoke billowing into the air. Bruno immediately realized Atami was trying to use the smoke as cover to escape. Instantly, bursts of gunfire lit up the air as his men sprayed bullets in Atami's direction. Atami, however, had already prepared for this. A few seconds later, Bruno ordered his men to cease fire, convinced that Atami's body must have been riddled with bullets. But when the smoke cleared, Bruno was shocked to discover that Atami was nowhere to be seen. Still, Bruno refrained from acting recklessly. Instead, he sent a soldier into the smoke to investigate. The soldier had barely stepped into the cloud when he was ambushed. Enraged, Bruno sent two more soldiers to flank Atami from both sides. Under strict orders, the two soldiers ventured into the minefield, risking their lives. What awaited them, however, was annihilation. The landmines left nothing of them but fragments, and Atami had once again vanished. But Bruno wasn't about to give up so easily, not with so much gold on the line. Bruno then dragged out two female prisoners from the transport they had brought along, forcing them to march ahead as human mine detectors. Meanwhile, using a dog tag that Bruno had picked up from the ground, Wolf quickly received a reply from headquarters. It turned out that Atami was once the most feared member of the Finnish commando forces. Legend had it that he single-handedly killed over 300 enemy soldiers. Because of this, he was known by all as the Immortal Warrior. At the same time, headquarters issued a direct order to the unit: abandon the pursuit and retreat immediately. But Bruno scoffed at such stories. To him, Atami was still just a man. Besides, the gold they were chasing would be their lifeline after the war ended in defeat. So he decided to disobey orders and continue the pursuit. On Atami's side, although he had narrowly escaped, he was injured. He had no choice but to stop, rest, and bandage his wounds. His battered body and overwhelming pain quickly caused him to drift into unconsciousness. However, not long after, he was startled awake by the distant barking of dogs. He scrambled to check the situation and saw that Bruno and his team were closing in. With no other option, Atami hid under the chassis of an abandoned car. The soldiers passing nearby didn't notice him, but Atami knew the two tracking dogs would likely sniff him out. Forced into a desperate situation, he decided to take a bold risk. As a troop transport passed by, Atami suddenly sprang out and grabbed onto the underside of the vehicle with both hands, but he knew this wouldn't work for long. After some quick thinking, he used his knife to pierce the vehicle's fuel line. Soon, the soldiers in the following vehicle noticed that the transport ahead was leaking fuel. They urgently called for the driver to stop the vehicle, and Atami used this brief distraction to crawl out from his hiding spot. However, before he could get far, the tracking dogs spotted him. This alerted all the soldiers, and Wolf immediately fired a shot that struck Atami in the leg. As he prepared to fire again, Bruno stopped him. Atami, now wounded, saw the dogs charging toward him. Realizing escape was impossible, he set himself on fire. Taking advantage of the momentary hesitation of the dogs, he sprinted toward the river with all the speed he could muster. Meanwhile, all the soldiers opened fire on Atami. In a critical moment, he managed to leap into the water. The heavy gold he carried caused him to sink rapidly to the bottom of the river. Soon, Bruno and his soldiers arrived at the riverbank. He knew Atami would have to surface eventually to breathe. Sure enough, before long, Atami emerged from the water. Without hesitation, Wolf fired his gun. Although Atami dove back underwater, a cloud of blood soon spread through the river. Believing they had finally hit their mark, Bruno ordered his men to take a boat out and retrieve the gold. But they had underestimated Atami yet again. As one soldier jumped into the water, Atami appeared right behind him, killing him without resistance. The gush of blood from the water terrified the two soldiers on the boat, who looked back at Bruno in panic. Bruno, however, coldly ordered them to continue. Reluctantly, another soldier jumped into the water, only to meet the same grim fate. The last remaining soldier was paralyzed with fear. In desperation, he disobeyed orders and tried to escape, but Bruno would not tolerate insubordination. He immediately commanded Wolf to shoot the fleeing soldier. The soldier died at the hands of his own comrades. Not long after, Bruno noticed that the small boat had drifted rapidly to the opposite bank. To his shock, Atami emerged from the boat's shadow, but by this point, he was too far away for Wolf's sniper rifle to reach. Frustrated, Wolf rushed back to the tank and aimed its mounted machine gun at Atami. To their astonishment, Atami used the corpse of a soldier as a shield, escaping the relentless barrage of gunfire. Despite the overwhelming firepower, Atami managed to survive and slip away. After a long and grueling day, Atami finally reached the town he had been heading for, but the scene before him left him utterly devastated. In the short time he had been away, his home had been completely destroyed. There was no time for grief. Atami had to keep moving through the night. Exhausted, he stopped at an abandoned gas station to rest. The overwhelming fatigue soon caused him to fall into a deep sleep, but not long after, he was startled awake by the sound of barking. He recognized the bark instantly. It was his loyal dog. Searching for him, he rushed to the roadside to meet his companion. Sure enough, the dog ran to him and leapt into his arms, but Atami soon noticed something horrifying. A bomb was strapped to the dog's body. Acting quickly, he removed the explosive and hurled it away, but he was just a second too late. When he regained consciousness, he saw Bruno's face leering over him. What happened next to Atami could only be imagined. Just when Bruno and his two subordinates believed Atami was surely dead, they were all gravely mistaken, because he still had a breath left. What really saved him was an airplane that needed to refuel. The strong airflow caused the wooden frame hanging Atami to loosen, and he was finally saved. At first, the two Nazi pilots who had arrived to refuel paid no attention to him, but one of them quickly realized that Atami was still alive. When he alerted his companion, The other pilot brushed it off with indifference. Unfortunately for them, this pilot underestimated Atami's capabilities by a wide margin. A sudden gunshot rang out, startling the second pilot. He turned in anger, only to discover too late that his companion was already dead. Realizing the true danger of the man they had crossed, he tried to react, but Atami was faster. By the time he understood the gravity of his mistake, it was already over. Though Atami had dealt with the two pilots, Bruno had taken off with the gold. This infuriated Atami, filling him with both rage and determination. Looking down at the barely breathing pilot and the plane nearby, Atami quickly formulated a plan. Meanwhile, Bruno remained oblivious to the fact that he would soon face the seemingly unkillable warrior again. Not long after, Bruno's convoy encountered the wreckage of a crashed plane up ahead. Curious, Bruno and his men went to investigate. Inside the plane, they found the pilot dead, with the very rope that had bound Atami still around his neck. This discovery sent a chill down Bruno's spine. He struggled to believe what he was seeing. How could this possibly be real? Panicking, he ordered his troops to leave the area immediately. Bruno himself retreated to the safety of his heavily armored tank. The convoy resumed its journey, but Atami was already launching his next attack. The first to fall were the two soldiers guarding the female prisoners. One was killed outright, and when the other went to check, Atami hurled him into the road. The following car ran over him without even seeing him. At this point, Atami climbed into the back of one of the trucks, where he found it full of female prisoners. Understanding that they had no choice but to comply with their captors, Atami wasted no time handing them a submachine gun. The truck driver remained oblivious to the chaos unfolding behind him until he, too, was dispatched by Atami. Thrown from the vehicle, the driver's fate was sealed. One of the female prisoners quickly took the driver's seat. Once she had control of the vehicle, Atami signaled for her to stop. She slammed on the brakes, causing the tank following closely behind to make an emergency stop. Nearly colliding with the truck, taking advantage of the chaos, Atami leapt onto the tank. The abrupt stop caught Bruno's attention, but the tank driver soon saw hand signals from the truck ahead, indicating everything was fine. Relaying this to Bruno, the driver assured him there was nothing to worry about, unaware that the gestures were orchestrated by the women in the truck. Once satisfied they hadn't drawn attention, the women accelerated the truck, quickly pulling alongside a troop transport vehicle ahead. This unusual behavior immediately raised the other driver's suspicion, though he had no idea what was about to happen. From the tank at the rear, Bruno's team had a clear view of the unfolding situation. Terrified by the chaos, Bruno ordered the tank driver to speed up. But moments later, a loud banging sound came from the top of the tank. It was Atami, furiously hammering on the hatch. Realizing what was happening, Bruno ordered Wolf to deal with Atami. Working together, they executed a sudden stop that sent Atami flying off the tank. Wolf quickly emerged to confront him, but Atami exploited Wolf's blind spots to evade his attacks. Circling around the tank, Atami seized an opening to ambush Wolf. After a brutal surprise attack, the two began a ferocious fight on top of the tank. Inside, Bruno observed the fight and coldly instructed the driver to ignore it and keep moving. As the tank accelerated, the brawl between Atami and Wolf intensified, but the sudden lurch threw both of them off the vehicle. Wolf was badly injured in the fall, and Atami wasted no time delivering a crushing blow that left him sprawled on the ground. Terrified and unable to resist, Wolf lay defenseless as Atami glared down at him with a menacing intensity. At that moment, two soldiers on motorcycles approached. Though armed with submachine guns, they were paralyzed with fear. A single, deliberate motion from Atami was enough to make them throw down their weapons and flee, abandoning their bikes in terror. Remarkably, Atami spared Wolf's life. Instead, he mounted one of the motorcycles and sped off in pursuit of the tank. Wolf, now alone, exhaled deeply in relief, thinking he was finally safe. But out of the fog behind him, the silhouettes of several liberated female prisoners began to emerge. Meanwhile, Bruno and the tank driver reached their extraction point, but in a shocking turn, Bruno drew his pistol and casually shot the driver dead. Without hesitation, he made his way toward the plane with the gold. Just as they prepared to take off, Atami came roaring toward them on the motorcycle. Without delay, he opened fire on the plane, riddling the cockpit with bullets. The pilot was hit. As the plane struggled to lift off, Atami ditched his gun and hurled a pickaxe at the aircraft, striking it with a loud clang. Despite this, the plane managed to take off. Bruno and the wounded pilot felt a fleeting sense of relief, thinking they had escaped, but they couldn't have been more wrong. Atami was clinging to the underside of the plane. Though barely hanging on, he managed to hook himself onto the landing gear. Summoning every ounce of strength, he smashed a hole in the plane's fuselage. The loud commotion finally drew Bruno's attention. Grabbing his submachine gun, he headed toward the rear of the plane. However, as soon as he opened the cabin door, he was struck by a pickaxe, knocking his weapon out of his hands. Tommy rushed forward, and the two engaged in a fierce, close-quarters fight. However, Tommy's injuries put him at a severe disadvantage, leaving him unable to fend off Bruno's relentless attacks. Bruno quickly realized he held the upper hand physically, but Tommy's piercing, murderous gaze kept him on edge. The two clashed again, but before long, Tommy's strength gave out, seemingly unable to fight back. Bruno, however, didn't let his guard down. He grabbed a rope from the plane and used it as a weapon to continue his assault. Under the relentless, storm-like blows, Tommy was finally beaten to the ground, unable to rise, but just seconds later, he pushed himself back up, defying all odds. This infuriated Bruno even further. In his blind rage, Bruno launched a ferocious attack, unaware that his recklessness would seal his fate. At that moment, the plane suddenly lurched and began spiraling out of control. Tommy quickly realized what had happened. The pilot had succumbed to his injuries, leaving the aircraft without power and plunging rapidly toward the ground. Seeing this, Tommy quickly picked up the bag of gold, then quickly picked up the rope in the plane, and then fixed himself to the railing of the bulkhead. The plane's descent grew faster and faster, and Tommy steeled himself for the inevitable crash. Moments later, the aircraft plunged headfirst into a swamp, sending a massive splash into the air. Amazingly, Tommy survived. He clawed his way out of the muck, battered but alive. As the saying goes, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. In the final scene, Tommy finally reached the National Bank. Without a word, he emptied the entire bag of gold onto the counter. His request was simple and direct.
Seteleitä. Isoja. Kiitos. Ei ole sitten niin perkeleen raskas kantaa.
I am a movie lover. Thanks for watching. See you next time.